With Lightfall being the latest expansion for Destiny 2, as well as wrapping up Season of Defiance recently, I feel like it's a good time for me to be able to kind of review everything that's been coming in since Lightfall's launch. Now, of course, we're going to be following after Witch Queen, which had one of the greatest stories and greatest expansion releases, in my opinion, of all Destiny's history, even surpassing Forsaken's, in my opinion. But does this meet the same expectation as Witch Queen, or does it fall flat as the cycle of Bungie's expansions does become fulfilled? Let's review. I want to start off this review with the campaign and the storyline of Lightfall, because ultimately that is the first thing that I gravitate towards. Now, when it does come to the campaign, they did once again provide the option of both a normal mode as well as a legendary mode. And of course, being me, I went with legendary mode because honestly, legendary mode is the way that I would always recommend to enjoy the campaign, because it feels less like a walk in the park and always feels like, okay, you're actually making progression throughout the story. And you get some really nice rewards at the end of it. Now, let's actually speaking about the campaign, it was not what I was hoping for, but also kind of what I was expecting. So if you have seen my initial thoughts for the Lightfall campaign earlier on, you kind of already know how I feel about this, but really, in the simplest of terms, it was Shadowkeep 2.0 in terms of where the story is, where we had more questions than answers. And honestly, I think Shadowkeep did better because there was a coherent storyline within there, while Lightfall was just, it didn't feel like there was one. It feels like it was going like different locations all the time. Now, the whole story is based around the Veil, and I literally, without even going into like the actual like archives, aka the books and the lores and everything outside of the game, you would have no idea what the hell the Veil is. Like, apparently everyone else, like all the other characters, the, Osiris, Nimbus, Callus, the friggin' dude himself, the Witness, they all know, but we don't, and we never get an answer. And I just don't get why. Because it feels like the one thing is that this story felt really short, and it really only scraped the surface of what we could have really gotten in terms of understanding the lore, understanding the Veil and what the impacts are, because it really felt like it was kind of going based off of what Beyond Light felt like, but to a more extreme degree, where it was like only 25% of real story progression and the remaining 75% literally just there as filler so you can utilize Strand and get used to it, which is fine, but I would rather have my story along with the Strand, please. Like, I don't want to have it where it's just, oh yes, I know how to use Strand. Do I know what the hell Strand is and what it's connected to the Veil? I would rather know what the hell is going on with that and barely have any time with Strand so I can explore on it on my own, than rather than, here's Strand, use Strand. You have any idea of what this is? No? Cool, but use it. Like, I don't like that. I really don't. Like, fitting the use of Strand within the main campaign just kind of diluted the story to the point where it felt like it was going to only last for like 3 hours if they didn't. Like, if they took everything out that didn't require us to utilize Strand or anything that was to develop Strand, we would have gotten maybe like a 2 to 3 hour campaign. At the last time we had that was back in Warmind, with, the entire campaign taking like no more than 4 missions and like an hour, which was pretty depressing at that time. Now, of course, when it comes down to it, personally for the missions, I actually would say the best part of the entire campaign was fighting Callus. Now, as much of its annoyance, because I did spend like over an hour there, it was still a really fun area and an arena that worked with both Strand as well as all your other subclasses. So you weren't restricted to utilizing Strand to get the best advantage, but it still gave you some benefit to kind of utilize it, as well as going based off of what you normally use as well. Now, there isn't really any time to specifically rest during the fight because you always are in that combat mode. Either they're shooting at you with it or anything of that sort. There's like stuff flying around, there's tormentors after you. So it was always a high intense location. I mean, that being said, I don't want to ignore the fact that essentially the fighting mechanics within this is, hey, we're going up against a massive colossus followed by a massive gladiator, because that's essentially what it is. The first stage is a colossus, while the second stage just becomes a gladiator, and it's just an oversized version of it. But again, it's still just the fact that it was somewhat entertaining. It's not to the part of Savathun's, because honestly that was just a whole unique mechanic that really evolved and worked with how Savathun was, while this one was just kind of feel like it was just kind of taped together, and they were just like, ooh, let's get that recycling badge again, and you reuse assets in terms of mechanics, which kind of sucks. But it's still just the one thing is that, you know, it could be better if they actually made it more unique to the actual boss fight, because ultimately what it was is, like I said, it's a great arena, but with just a copy and paste of two boss fights together. Now, of course, I kind of wanted to just circle back to what I was mentioning before with the whole cycle of Bungie's expansions, because I had the anticipation of this kind of being a situation where it falls flat on its face, and that's primarily because, looking back at Forsaken, we did receive the Shadowkeep DLC, which also kind of felt into the same area, which really does suck, because honestly, coming after Witch Queen, you would think it was going to be a lot better, but unfortunately the anticipation of that following the height of Witch Queen is going to have it where, you know, the game does fall flat in the terms that you really wish it didn't. Now, of course, ultimately, bland storyline, a lot of filler, and so it's not really the most enjoyable campaign to go through. I would say maybe it's not really a campaign worth going through unless you want to turn your brain off, because trust me, you're not going to get any answers through it. But the one thing is, though, that I did want to talk about, though, afterwards, is Neomuna itself, because honestly, I think Neomuna did something very well that the campaign really should have done more. Now, Neomuna as a patrol location is a wonderful area to definitely go and visit, because it honestly, for me, it reminds me of a neon version of New Mombasa, which I have enjoyed and think it's one of the best locations Bungie has ever created in their time with Halo before coming over to Destiny in 2014. Now, on top of that, each area has a difficulty modifier that forces you to be 15 power level under, making it more of a challenge to explore each of the areas and make the combat more engaging, because it doesn't become a simple cakewalk. It becomes actually, hey, you have to fight these guys or you're going to die. Now, on top of that, they do have multiple different things and multiple different activities that are going on within the area. For example, you have the Vex Strike Force that does occur within the incursion zones that rotate on a daily basis between the three main areas. You also have the partition missions that are on a 3-week cycle, and the legendary patrols, along with other activities, will provide you with loot, weapons, reputation for Nimbus, as well as other items that you would need later on, but we'll go over those later. Now, afterwards, and this is something that you can do after the campaign, the exotic missions that come up. You have 3 different exotic missions. All of them have another way to really get you acclimated with the atmosphere and also see the development of the city, as well as the different characters, especially Nimbus, who, I swear to Christ, why did they not give them the development of what we saw within the exotic mission in the campaign? Like, I just, like, as much as I understand, like, oh, there was this, like, this whole, like, okay, this is Cloudstrider stuff, they could have at least shown something of a development within there. I'm not going to get into spoilers, because honestly, it's literally going to take you, like, 3 missions to actually find it, I think. I don't even remember how long it takes, but it's like, you get there halfway through. But essentially, you see no development, no character development within the storyline of Nimbus. But afterwards, when you go down the path of the deterministic chaos, you get more of an actual development from them, which honestly should have been within the actual campaign itself. I felt like it would have been much better fit for there. We should at least see something connected to that. Now, going back to the actual, everything else, on top of the exotic missions, the legendary weapons that you can get from Neomuna are actually really nice as well, because you can get, as an intrinsic perk on each of them, of nanotech tracer rockets, which allows your shot to become a homing rocket after you hit multiple, shots on them. Which is great, unless you're in Crucible and going up against a round robin, which could essentially just 3-tap you, and also kill you from the grave. So that's always like the fun part about it. But I can definitely guarantee you that when you go to Neomuna and you go and check out the activities, check out the events, and check out the different items and doing the different patrols, you will actually be able to have a really fun time. And I 100% highly think that this is one of the best things that they have added into Lightfall, on top of the new subclass. Now, speaking of the subclass, it's time for us to actually talk about Strand. Now, Strand is really fun to use, and the fact that the campaign actually gives us the opportunity to use it, even though it does sacrifice a lot of the storytelling and development of the characters because of it, is nice, because at least it gives you the opportunity to use it in each mission. And also, even though it is 75% filler, you still get some kind of benefit from that. You get to see how the different classes work, how it interacts with the world, and also you get some more of a benefit of kind of understanding, okay, this is how this is taken care of. Now, the one part is that you do get a very nice understanding of what Strand is, but when you go after the campaign though, it does leave a lot to be desired. Now, when it comes to the actual progression for Stasis, you saw that that was time locked. However, for Strand, it's completely different. And I think it's in a very good way that it's different as well. Because unlike Stasis being, time gated between challenges and locked behind those as well, Strand is just based off of getting Strand Meditation, a currency that you get by using Strand activities, as well as parts of rewards that you get for doing challenges and patrols within Neomuna. It is a 10 times much better system than Stasis because you are able to get all the aspects within the span of a week, essentially, depending on how actively you are playing. Although it does come with its own issues when it comes to this type of situation. Now, the main issue is that right off the bat, when you use it in the campaign, you have all access to it. You essentially are always supercharged, and you have essentially unlimited stasis, unlimited gear, and everything, and it feels really good. But as soon as you get access to Strand in the beginning, like right after the campaign, nothing. And I mean absolutely nothing. You have to actually go through and reacquire every single Strand aspect and everything about it. Even the slight things. You don't get almost anything. You get maybe like 2 things right off the bat, and then the rest of it you have to grind on your own. And the problem is with that is because you're not supercharged during that time, it feels so much more of a slog to get that situation taken care of. Now, of course, again, like I said before, you do get Strand fairly quickly if you utilize it and if you go through Neomuna and go through the activities. So it's not like it's a terrible thing. But there was also something else that could have made it a lot worse, because beforehand, Bungie, when people have gotten access to Strand, was actually going to time gate a lot of the stuff within Strand, meaning that you weren't going to have a full Strand build created until after World's First of Brood of Nightmares. Speaking of which, I'll come after that later. So a lot of people complained about that, and Bungie decided, okay, yeah, we essentially made it so that it's stupidly powerful within the campaign, and then you're essentially given like fucking 2 pieces of like, sticks, and then go have fun and try and rebuild a goddamn skyscraper or something like that. So the fact is that that was the initial intention before they made the adjustment, does already kind of show that there could have been a more negative reception from Strand, but ultimately still Strand being included into this and the way that it feels and the way that it plays is really fun, and I'm really glad that they bring that in. But honestly, I kind of wish that if they were to go through the whole process within Strand, it should have been more of a progressive throughout the campaign rather than here's everything unlocked for you, supercharged. So you essentially are used to using this broken build, and then all of a sudden after the campaign, you were just given pretty much bare bones Strand. Which honestly, kind of wish that they went through the progression of that, because I feel like the progression of it makes it more of an engaging and more interesting way of learning how to develop Strand on your own, rather than just being given all the arsenals and then taken away after the campaign. Now, the last thing within the real DLC that I wanted to speak on its own is the Root of Nightmares raid. Now, obviously, if you wanted to really see my thoughts about the whole raid, I do already have a day one raid video that is already up. And honestly, a lot of the stuff within that video still kind of translate over to right now, because personally for me, majority of my opinions and most of my stuff always comes through when it comes down to the day one experience, because obviously a regular run of Root of Nightmares isn't really going to be that much of a help, other than, okay, can you really teach this to other people? Which, by the way, you really can. Again, said that already in the day one video. But I did also want to go more into just how the master mode feels, as well as the different challenges that came out to it, because again, by the time that this video's come out, we already had a weekly challenge rotation for Root of Nightmares, so that you would be able to kind of see what every single challenge is, as well as trying it out on master mode. Now, let's start off with master mode in general. Master mode is just a joke. And I say this because compared to the regular contest mode within Root of Nightmares, this case, Master Mode literally gives you the benefit of a surge and the only detriment of extra champions. And again, those champions literally do nothing to cause any real headaches unless you're not paying attention. Now, because when they made the adjustment for Master Mode, they made it so that there isn't going to be any modifiers that would negatively impact you, but make sure that you are 20 under the power level cap. So you're going to be going to contest mode, but again, like I said, you are given surges, which are massive benefits to your ability kills, your ability damage, as well as your weapon damage, but literally no other detriments other than, hey, here's extra champions, which ultimately does really nothing to it. And the fact of the matter is that when it comes down to the actual process of it, it was a lot easier to go through, because one, unlike in day one where you had to learn the mechanics, in this case it's just, okay, now you just got to make sure, keep an eye on champions, and that's that. You know, the way that everything works within Master Mode is, again, just the same thing. All you have to do is just be more observant on where the champions are. And even then, there's only really 2 extra spots, maybe 3 locations, that it becomes more of a problem. But if you're keeping an eye out for that, it really just gets trivialized immediately. And that's kind of the issue for that. I think the one thing would be is that really kind of going over the challenges. But again, challenges, they're a nice change, but because of how simplistic the mechanics are within Root of Nightmares, for every single location, like every single encounter, it really doesn't bring much of a variety. I mean, for example, the first challenge is, hey, you have to be blessed with the light to kill the tormentor. That's the challenge. And then the second challenge is you cannot shoot your own crystal across. You have to have someone from the other side do it for you. Again, it's interesting, but it's not hard. The only one that really actually creates some variety within the situation and makes it more of a more complex and more engaging challenge is Macrocosm, because instead of having both sides with, you know, light on left, dark on right, You actually swap the two sides, and that's actually more of an interesting situation because you kind of have to adjust yourself in a much bigger pattern, because instead of just like, okay, one swap and then damage, you have to do it twice because there's no other way to kind of go beyond that. Now, obviously we can talk about the last one, but essentially it's, hey, everyone has to enable a node on each side, and that's it. And as long as you're able to time that correctly, it's a guaranteed win. You get it. It's not hard. Now, the one thing that I did also want to kind of speak about is, since the day one run that I did, as well as assisting other people during it, I was able to actually get the conditional finality. And my God, I have never had this much fun with a raid exotic since I think, what? I would say maybe 1K from Last Wish, or no, better yet, Anarchy. Because, oh my God, I friggin' love that gun. It is so great. It literally can take care of pretty much all the champions at once because of the way that it works, because it allows you to do shatter and ignition, so unstops are friggin' done. It stuns, regular champions, it stuns barriers, it stuns overloads because of that shatter and that stasis situation. On top of that, the ignition, again, it applies a burn, so we get additional damage towards it. And it's really fun, and I'm super glad that they brought this in, because this is a very interesting idea, and I think this is one of their best weapons that they have come out with. Now, obviously, I can talk about the other weapons when it comes to it as well, just the regular weapons. Like, when it comes to it, personal favorites of mine is Rufus's Fury and Briar's Contempt. That is both the aggressive frame linear rifle as well as the auto rifle. Those are my personal favorites because the weapons within those and the perk combinations are really good. Although you can still get some really cool, interesting setups with other weapons. So don't sleep on the other ones. Do check them out, try them out, see if they work with your build, because a lot of those are really good. I just haven't been able to really test them as much as I would want to. Now, the armor, I'm not someone who's a fashion guy, but I don't like it. Because look, as much as I'm somebody who enjoys kind of the interesting, insane, and wacky, this is not something that I really like. I find it a bit weird, so to speak. I think the only thing that really looks cool on the characters is the cloaks for the Hunter and the mark for the Titan. The chest piece for the Warlock is cool because you get like a couple extra arms, but again, it just doesn't feel like it works, but it's just something that I don't particularly like. I wouldn't be surprised if you can make some really cool designs with it and really cool transmogs with it with some nice effects. But honestly, I would rather utilize them and just transmog it to what I prefer, because they do provide some really good armor specs, especially if you're running in Master, because the Master does provide some focusing for certain aspects of it. So there is a bit of more of a benefit when it comes to that as well. But I think the one thing is, when it comes down to it overall, this raid, Root of Nightmares, is one of the easier ones, or if not the easiest one, to get the seal for, because the mechanics within each of the triumphs are very simple. The encounter triumphs themselves are very straightforward. There's nothing that you have to really do outside of the kind of the obvious. The only ones that really have anything based around it, because when you really look at it, it's essentially you delay on killing certain ads, or it's based off of timing. And the fact is that, as long as you know how to count to 3, and hold your weapons until the end. Again, the encounter triumphs are very easy. The master mode is very simple. My clan and I essentially did all the weekly challenges on master mode, because we just said, screw it, like, this is a very simple raid, we might as well just do it here and just get it over and done with. 2 birds, 1 stone. So it's definitely something where it's like, okay, this is kind of a simple task. And the one thing is, compared to everything else where the challenges actually do change the way that you play the game, this one just makes slight adjustments, and honestly, you can get it really easily with like maybe 1 or 2 pulls if need be, just so you can kind of get a good understanding of what to do. Now, moving away from Lightfall in total, I kind of wanted to talk about the strikes, and there's a main reason why I wanted to kind of keep the strikes on its separate thing, because even though Lightfall did introduce a new strike within it, the problem is that it's only one strike. But let me first start off with what I would say is the more positive part. So the one thing that I definitely like is the new strike of the Hypernet Current, because I really enjoyed the way that the atmosphere of the second half when you go into the Vex system kind of brings back the season of the Splicer seasonal activity. And honestly, I love that. I mean, I have the sweatshirt for it and it's friggin' amazing. But I think the one thing that's really cool about it is that you can kind of see the interaction between the Taken and the Vex, because you do see that within the system, you are fighting both of them against each other. And then, outside of that, you are going up against the Shadow Legion, and their forces as well. So you have a mix of all three, and the boss fight as well is very interesting because, one, it is a massive Hydra, and again, you do play through this during the campaign. But on Grandmaster mode, like what we did it on, it's actually really fun to do it. It's not too bad, like it's not overly difficult, because again, it is just based off of, okay, try and make sure that you avoid all the crap on the ground during the, his immune phases, and then being able to do damage in the correct locations and keeping an eye on Axion bolts. So again, very straightforward, very simple. It's not a too difficult challenge to do so, but I think that when it comes down to this strike, this is a very nice strike. I like the aesthetics of it. I think the boss fight's really fun, and the fact that we have somewhat of a variety of people that we fight, especially within the Grandmaster system as well, it's really good for that. Now, obviously, on top of that, the fact that it's only one strike is also kind of a bit infuriating for me, because we haven't had a single strike introduced with a DLC in a very long time. I mean, even back in like year one, each strike that was introduced at that time, I mean, for what's it called? For Warmind, essentially the 2 strikes that came into play, one of them was just a repeat of the final mission. But it's still the fact that we were introduced to a strike. Not only that, we also are having all these, all these other types of situations, but then all of a sudden, this is the first time that we get just a single strike. Now, of course, they did add in the battlegrounds for Mars as another strike, but again, I don't really consider that as them adding in that strike, rather than reintroducing it into the pool, which is fine, but again, it's not something new that we haven't seen before. Now, on top of that, they also did a couple of remakes to 2 of the strikes that people have kind of liked before, and unfortunately kind of ruined parts of them. So the first one that I really wanted to talk to you about is the Lake of Shadows one. The Lake of Shadows essentially has been butchered to the point where it gets infuriating for half of it. Because in the beginning, where you would just need to take care of the taken blights and then move on towards the next part, they stuck it behind 2 escort missions. 2! One in the beginning, which is okay, sure, fine, whatever. But we had to get a second one afterwards. Like, come on, why? I don't understand why they had to add in 2 escort missions in literally back to back. Like, even the fact of just thinking of more than one escort mission within a strike just to pad the runtime of the strike is aggravating to me. And doing it on Grandmaster, it get boring. Like, I remember having to do it multiple times because, like, obviously there was like some miscalculations here and there. But again, we were just doing the strike and then escort mission. I'm like, why? It is the most boring thing ever. There is a reason why when it came to Witch Queen, I barely did the Wellspring activity, because again, that, you know, if you're on defense, guess what? It's an escort mission. On offense, it's also an escort mission. And also, the new public event that they introduced in Witch Queen, hey, guess what? That's also an escort mission. I barely did any of those. I literally did just a bare amount just so I can get the gumshoe seal and just effed off after that. And the fact that they essentially gave us the exotic glaives just for free if you got it on one character, I was happy with that. I just went with it, and I never touched Wellspring ever again, because at that point it was no use to me. There was no function to it, and I did not want to deal with the bullshit of the escort missions. But they just tossed in 2 of them. Now, of course, again, there are some benefits to it. The fact of the matter is that we actually kind of get some boss fights within there, you know, against the Primeval Meatball, and then a little kind of area with the Tormentor, which was kind of cool. I like that part. I think it was really nice. And the fact that the actual Primeval Meatball boss fight actually felt like somewhat of a boss fight was really nice, because if you guys remember, before the remake, it was essentially, hey, there's a taken Centurion, and then he dies. Like, you literally, it's just, we'll just toss the super at it, run through, and be done. It didn't actually feel like it was an obstacle there. It was just, hey, let's make orbs on you guys, and then leave it at that. And I think the fact that they changed it so that we actually have a boss fight rather than something like that is really good. And I think it's really the good part about this. They didn't change the final boss that much. They made him a little bit more tankier, but they made it much easier for you to be able to really navigate throughout the arena, because the actual taken blight or the taken goo on the ground doesn't actually move up with each stage, which is great, and I think that's a very good improvement to that. But ultimately, again, the benefits of, you know, the extra boss fight, the actual Tormentor arena, which is just a small room, and, you know, the nice improvements that they did to the actual boss fight are pretty much marred, because, you know, first thing they get stuck with is a damn escort mission twice. Now, moving from Lake of Shadows, let's go over to the Arms Dealer Strike, because the Arms Dealer Strike is a little bit of a better situation, but not to the point where I would say it's like, ooh, it's been completely approved. Now, with the actual Arms Dealer Strike, they did change a couple of things, although a lot of it has been same pretty much. The only real main difference is that instead of you just kind of going through it, you essentially are also kind of releasing Kaido's allies, which do help you in the end, which is actually a really nice thing. However, unlike the original way where you can essentially bake the boss before he even gets onto any of the platforms, they did make him have a forced immune mechanic. So obviously you will have to go into taking care of, you know, the actual Centurion, bringing it over the orb. And so, yeah, it does kind of cause a little bit of a kind of, you know, a bit of a delay on that. But the one thing and the main benefit of that is because even though they made it where essentially, okay, you have to still do the mechanic for the boss fight, you do have a lot of allies with you still. So you're taking a lot less heat from when you were normally doing with just you 3. They did remove a Thresher from there, so it's like you don't have to really worry about that, although they did bring back an armored personnel carrier, which does have a damaging shot, but the good thing is you can just shoot off the gun, so it doesn't become a problem anymore. But a lot of the times the fight was very easy, and again, because all 3 of these strikes, including Mars Battleground, were all within the Grandmaster system, we were able to kind of get a good understanding for all of them. And honestly, out of the 3 that came out, and then obviously the Battlegrounds was the only one that really had somewhat of a challenge, followed by Lake of Shadows. Lake of Shadows we had to do a couple of other times, but that was just because of silly mistakes. But then Hypernet Current and Arms Dealer, we were able to go through it without any issues. Because again, obviously, Arms Dealer, we've been pretty much used to since that was, the original Nightfall that came out with D2, if you guys remember that. But when it comes down to it, it's not too bad, but it's, it does still feel like it is a bit disappointing for that. And honestly, I don't think the remaking of those two strikes, especially with the way that they've been remade, justifies having just a single new strike and, reintroducing a Battlegrounds as a strike. Because ultimately, that's kind of a cop-out in my end. Now, the last thing I did really want to kind of speak about is the Season of Defiance storyline, as well as the different changes that have come to focusing when it comes to these seasonal stories. Now, obviously, with the Season of Defiance storyline, it did come out with the Lightfall expansion, so there really wasn't going to be any real story that's going to be told. I mean, it only took like, 5 or 6 missions to even do, not even. But the storyline is primarily based around civilians being kidnapped by the Shadow Legion, and we help Amanda, Marasov, as well as Devram and Mithrax to go through and try and rescue the civilians from the last city. Now, obviously, they did spread out with these activities through 3 different locations. You can have one being issued within the Cosmodrome, one in the EDZ, and then the last one is the prison ship that you can actually see in orbit when you're within the farm. Now, each activity does have their unique bosses, but it still essentially follows the same process with each area. Now, on initial playthrough, each activity is fun for the first time, but honestly, it's just at that point it becomes like a daily, okay, time to do one run, and then just get bored for the rest of it. Now, the good part is, and this is going to be kind of where I actually got a lot of the more excitement out of, is the fact that they changed the way that the focusing with the engrams works within the helm, as well as for all the seasonal weapons. So, other than just trying to grind for a resource by playing like Crucible, or Strikes, or Gambit, or wanting to make you suffer for no reason, the greatest part is, it's all about you playing. So instead of having to worry about a resource, you get these engrams that you can then go to the helm for and be able to just focus into the weapons once you unlock that upgrade. So instead of having to worry about, okay, I have an Umbral and then I have this resource, it's, okay, I have this number of engrams for focusing. And depending on the situation, you can either do the focusing for the armor or the focusing for the weapons. And they made it really easy for deep sight weapons to show up, because if you do a legend run for your first time, you're guaranteed 2 deep sight weapons that you haven't been able to craft yet, as well as once you actually craft one of those weapons, you aren't going to be getting those red frames for those weapons anymore, because again, they did ultimately change the way the crafting works within Lightfall. And I think it is a very good thing, and I think it's one of the best things that they have done when it comes to making these changes compared to what we have in the last seasons. Now, moving away from the activities as well as the focusing, which is normally what I would see is the more positive point, let's actually talk about the story, or in this case, lack thereof, so to speak. Now, one thing is, when it comes actually to the story itself, it is nice that we're kind of seeing reintroductions and, people given relevancy once again. Like, for example, Amanda Holiday is in this, as well as Crow, Devram, like I said before, who literally has only been seen as the EDZ vendor after they vaulted the Red War. And on top of that, you also have Mithrax as well as Marasov being involved, because, of course, we're utilizing the ley lines. Now, throughout the actual missions and story missions, we do get a little bit more of a background with Amanda Holiday, kind of seeing, what got her to become a pilot, what she kind of was her inspiration, and kind of going through there, which was nice. And don't get me wrong, it was actually really cool to kind of get that, because we actually haven't seen much of a backstory from her since the Red War when she was first introduced. However, really, compared to that development and the inclusion of all the other characters, are really the only good highlights when it comes down to this. because when it comes to the development, it was just not really there. Like everything else was just kind of focused around the activity, but we weren't really given a distinct reason why. Like we weren't able to see, okay, this is the reason specifically that the Shadow Legion's going after the Last City citizens. And that's like, we don't see that. All we're doing is just, okay, we're gonna rescue some more citizens. Great, awesome, perfect. But then we don't get really much of an explanation other than, ooh, it's trying to mess with our morale. It's like, great, I could have said that for like 90% of the other things that we were doing. Like that's not a real answer to the question at all. Now, obviously, now this is going to be primarily within the spoilers section. Within the story, we do get the death of Amanda Holiday, which does kind of suck, but the problem is that it really didn't feel like it had much of an impact compared of what it should have had. Because as much as it was kind of like a quote-unquote surprise, so to speak, it really wasn't. And the main reason why I say this is because if you went into the tower, you've noticed that, one, not only Amanda is essentially gone as a vendor from the tower, but you also see all of the stuff that Amanda would offer went over to Rahul to make it a little bit more compact in locations. So we had an inkling that she was not going to be around anytime soon. But not only that, like even if that was seen as still a surprise, there really wasn't much of a repercussion on that. Like it was, what, I think maybe like the only real impact that it had was just like Crow's reaction to it. And then we saw the reactions of like Devram, of Mara, and Mithrax, but we didn't really see much else out of that. And then we thought, okay, we still had that final mission. But when that final mission came through and it was just to kind of destroy the, you know, the orbital prison's engine and the ship itself, in retaliation to Amanda's death, it really didn't feel like much really happened. Now, it does feel kind of bland when it comes to it. Granted, it should be taken with a grain of salt because, again, this is a supplementary storyline to the main campaign, but even then, like, I mean, we had that last time as well with the Season of the Risen, and the Season of the Risen had a more engaging storyline, even though it was like maybe like what 4 or 5 missions as well, and it was actually more engaging. I was more enthralled with it because there was a lot more to do, there was a lot more going on, when in this case it was just, oh, we're doing an activity to save citizens. Why? I don't know. We're just going to save more citizens. And then like, oh, someone died. Cool. And we got really no much of an impact. Now, again, I'm not going to say that, oh, yeah, Amanda's death wasn't significant. It was, but in reality, she was like only brought in for like a couple of missions. And then after that, she's just like, she's dead. Like, again, that's kind of like the something that's also paralleled within the campaign as well for Lightfall, just because, again, you know, we meet a character, we interact with them for like 3 missions, and then all of a sudden they die, and it's just like, okay, great. I'm glad that we had like only 2 times that we dealt with them. And they're supposed to be like this pivotal character, but they feel like it's like a freaking Carmine from, you know, Gears of War. If you don't get the reference, do check out Gears of War. Fun game. And Carmine's the best. Anyway, but yeah, I mean, when it comes down to those type of situations, this was definitely a bigger letdown than I was expecting. Because honestly, when it comes down to those type of situations, even with the short storyline, you can still get a lot out of it. And I feel like that whoever is the story director when it comes to the Season of Defiance didn't really take advantage of that and being able to really create an engaging story, even though it may be only a few episodes worth of stuff within it. Like, don't get me wrong, there wasn't a lot of time to do it, but I mean, still, you could have at least written something good. Now, when it comes down to it, like, you know, it did feel super lazy when it came to the writing. It's just like, oh yeah, we're gonna do this because we can, and that was it. So I think one thing is that this is definitely a letdown, even when you have the expectation set to be like, okay, this is not gonna have much. This even had less of content than expected. Because overall, I think the only real benefit for this is more development of Amanda before she died, as well as the changes that they made to the seasonal weapon focusing with the actual engrams and the lack of resources needed to grind them. But outside of that, everything else was just kind of a letdown when it comes down to the brass tacks of it all. So when we really look at this expansion as a whole, and that's including like the story, the Neomuna, everything that I kind of talked about, as well as a couple of the other things that I haven't talked about, like the Vexcalibur exotic mission and how that really kind of just relates back to Ashenmir's actual explanation and reasons for his voice lines when you were able to doing the Pyramidian strike. Looking at everything, it's not a good follow-up to Witch Queen. It feels like, when it comes down to it, it feels like the people who were writing the storyline for Witch Queen, I know that they also were brought in for Lightfall, and it looks like what happened was they really kind of got lazy when it came down to it and kind of just coasted off the success of Witch Queen to come into that. Because with the campaign barely giving the player any real information regarding the plot, as well as introducing like one-dimensional characters that are developed outside of the campaign, and then also characters that are just there for a little bit and then just removed immediately, just shows signs that a lack of depth and progression within the storyline that barely even contributes to the entirety of the Destiny universe as a whole, where it leaves us with more questions, almost like little to no answers being provided for any of them. Now, granted, with the refreshing patrol area and through events throughout Neomuna, it does lend a unique experience within Neomuna, kind of giving you some more of a reason to kind of go into the area. However, compared to everything else, like the Root of Nightmare raids with its simplified mechanics to previous raids, and Master Mode being seen as an easier version of contests with challenges that really haven't changed much of the Root of Nightmares encounters, makes it more of one of the mundane raids that Bungie had offered, within the history of Destiny. Now, on top of that lackluster campaign and a simplistic raid, the seasonal story progresses at a snail's pace, or it doesn't even show any progression at all, really. Because again, back to just like what we were doing, we still have no idea why the Shadow Legion is just kidnapping civilians of the last city, because again, we are just never given any explanation for that. Hopefully we'll get some more answers later on in next season, but again, the fact that we haven't received any right now doesn't really look good, because again, if we're supposed to get the answers from next season, there's a very big drought of content and story progression from this season of Defiance to next season of Season of the Deep. So, it's not really looking that good. Now, with the main positives really only being the new patrol area and Strand, the Lightfall DLC and the Season of Defiance is leaving a lot to desire. Again, this is, like I said before, a Shadowkeep 2.0, and possibly even something worse than Shadowkeep. Now, granted, even with the amount of criticism that I do give the game, I will still recommend getting this DLC, because if you go by playtime, you do get like hours upon hours of content. There's still a lot of stuff that you can do that doesn't even touch any of the old ritual activities, strikes, Crucible, Gambit, or any of that. But you still get a lot of stuff with it, including new weapons, a really fun subclass to play with. But, I would honestly hold off on getting the DLC immediately for full price, because again, since Bungie has indicated that they're not going to be taking anything out of D2 anytime soon, because again, I think they've got rid of all the interfering coding with the last time they did the DCV, you can kind of wait for a sale, like maybe a summer sale or maybe even the fall sale, when it comes to Steam, to purchase the DLC and even the premium expansion pass, just so you can have access to all the activities that will be coming out this year, including Season of Defiance, Season of the Deep, and the other 2 seasons that are coming out, as well as the dungeon and the reprise raid, which I do believe is going to be free to play as well. And so, just kind of wrapping this up here, my final score would be, I would say, a 7 out of 10. if only primarily is boosted because of Neomuna's engagement where it comes to the unique activities and the unique situations that it can provide, as well as a really challenging and fun patrol area. Everything else really just drags it down with a lackluster campaign, lack of story development, and really something that leaves you with more questions and possibly some anger towards Bungie after knowing that the story leads for Witch Queen were the ones who worked on Lightfall. If you have watched the entire video up until this point, thank you very much for watching. Hopefully you enjoyed and kind of saw how I looked at stuff. Now again, there are going to be other review videos that will be coming out later in the year. Normally those are going to be ones that will be coming out after I finish up the game that it would be connected to. The next one up is going to be Atomic Heart, which should be coming out fairly soon compared to this one. But the one thing is I wanted to make sure that I do get everything taken care of on that end, as well as there may be some other hit pieces that I might be breaking out, just because there is a lot to talk about when it comes to Destiny 2, especially with a lot of the other stuff, because again, I didn't touch on everything, and there is a lot left that I can kind of call Destiny out to. But, you know, we'll leave those for other videos. But if you do want to see more, do hit the subscribe button as well as hit the bell, so when the review does come up, or any videos that come up on this channel, you'll be the first to find out. Do check out the main channel to see the Let's Plays as I do go through the games and show you the progression that I have gone through before showing off the review, so you can see what I'm seeing and kind of go based off of what I do to get a better understanding of what the review is about. If you want to see the Let's Plays live, do check out the Twitch channel. Again, link in the description along with the main channel's description. And to keep yourself up to date, check out the Twitter, follow that as well. But with that being said, thank you guys for watching. I'll see you guys next time. Take care.